cameras off, which is looking like it's happening. That's great. We are recording and we have currently got the chat turned off, just in case any personal details or things that shouldn't be shared publicly are shared. But we will be turning it on at the end of the presentation. So if you do have any questions, you will be able to pop them in the chat box at the end of the presentation, and I will then send a round robin to everyone attending with the answers to the questions. So no question is too big or too small. We may have to come back and kind of offer additional support if it's a very intensive query. But yes, the chat box will appear at the end of the presentation so that if you do have any questions, you can pop them in there. Just while we are finishing on admitting everybody, there's a little questionnaire that we've made on the Nearpod website. If you can see down in the bottom of your screen there, the address is join.nearpod.com, and you can use the code to answer the 3 questions that we have. There's no pressure to answer the 3 questions, and they don't involve taking any personal details. It's just to see about kind of levels of engagement and where it would be good to tailor our support as we move forward in doing more webinars, hopefully. I won't be able to answer hands up questions, I'm afraid, because I don't have the ability to actually click on you individually. But I do have 2 members of staff on as admin, and if they can work it out, they will, and you will try and communicate that way. If not, if you can drop an email to us at sleeptraining@Cerebra, it will come up on the next page as well, so you don't have to try and spell it correctly. As soon as the admitting pings stop appearing, we are going to make a start, as I know some people are attending in their lunch break, so it does need to fit within the 60 minutes so that people aren't then having to return later after their lunch break. As I've had a brief break in the pings of people wanting to come in, we are going to make a start. So if you have just joined, if you could pop to join.nearpod.com and use that code to answer the questions. And if you can't or don't want to, or there's some sort of problem with it, please don't worry. It's not going to affect anything now. So you should all be muted with your cameras off, and the chat will appear at the end of the presentation for any questions for people who have joined since I said that the last time. So let's make a start so that we can definitely be finished by 13:30. Within this training presentation, there's myself. My name is Jax, and I'm the sleep training coordinator. And my line manager, Enika Woods, is currently manning our sort of admin side, with the lovely Meg helping her as well. If there are any problems, or you have any questions or queries or issues that need additional support, or you just want to make contact with us, the email address is down there at the bottom. So that's sleeptraining@cerebra.org.uk. And hopefully when the chat reappears at the end, everyone will be able to pop their questions in, and we can then send out a round robin of answers and kind of signposting links, depending on what the queries were. So the key goals of our hour together today are to really look at the CALM framework, to be able to support the sleep of the children and young people that we either all work with or live with, or both. As I said on the previous pages, cameras should be off and everyone should be muted. We are recording this, and the recording will be made available. It may take a little bit of time just to get it up onto our website and to be able to share that, but it is being recorded, and you will be able to rewatch it. And when the chat opens, please don't put any personal details in the questions, initials, or just referring to a child if it's a sort of specific question, rather than any personal details, just because there are Currently 105 people on the webinar, and we don't want anything to be shared that could identify anybody that is not consenting to that. So back to the key goals of the session. We are going to try and demystify some of our sleep challenges and some of the concerns and issues that we know are more common and are faced by more and more sort of children and families, and then professionals trying to support them. We want to give some reassurance that we can make small changes, and those can be really meaningful, even if they don't look big, or they don't kind of follow the exact scripting within some of the other guidance. And we want to try and really use sort of practical approaches and some problem solving and outside the box thinking to make small changes that can make these meaningful improvements. Small progresses over time can lead to really significant positive changes within whole families, and that's what we really want to look at today. We know from being a charity that supports children with additional needs and intellectual disabilities and brain injuries that a lot of the families that we support, and some parents who are on this webinar, are very overwhelmed and exhausted and stressed. And it's why we like to look for small changes and positive changes, and how we can add things into the routine to try and make improvements rather than by removing things. We always like to think of behavior as communication. So when you are just removing things from a child, you need to think about what you're communicating by doing that. So that's where we like to look at adding in and making small sustainable changes, rather than trying to put too much pressure on a family to do too much at once, which can then cause trauma and more stress to an already incredibly stressed parent or carer. So by looking at the idea of calm as a framework, that's going to focus on change, assessment, learned associations, and managing routine. And then at the end, we are going to talk about the courses that we offer, as well as all of the other support that Cerebra offers people. For people who are just joining, the presentation is being recorded and you will be able to watch it afterwards. The chat box will open at the end for questions, which will then be emailed out once the answers have been written. So we won't be responding to questions in the chat at the end. It will come out in an email. And at the present time, you are all coming in with your cameras off and muted. So thinking about change, there's the idea of recognizing the need for change. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to be thinking about before we start anything. If you are working with a family or you are struggling yourself, is sleep the biggest issue? And is that where we should be focusing? Now, hopefully within this webinar, the idea is the answer to that question would be yes, and that's why we're doing it. But it's always worth starting with that question. If you are a professional working with a family and they don't believe that sleep is the biggest issue that they need that support with, it's probably best to begin with the issue that they believe is the biggest factor, and then move on to sleep as you have improved other aspects. And we also need to be thinking about making these small changes and gradual adjustments instead of sweeping in and attempting to change everything. Anyone who is still going with their New Year's resolutions will know how difficult it is to change behaviour. Most people that I know have given up already, and we're only just over 3 weeks into the year. So I think New Year's resolutions help really illustrate how difficult change is. And even if it's something you really want to do, it can be really, really difficult to actually be able to consistently do that. And that's why we like to think of the idea of gradual adjustments and small changes. so that it does become sustainable and it's not just another thing for the parent, the carer, the child to feel that they are doing incorrectly and failing at. We really want to empower rather than isolate. When thinking about change, we have used two different, a model and a framework in order to create these sort of 7 C's of behavior change. If you did want to have a look at the two, the model and the framework, I've written them down there so you can go and have a look at that. And we do actually go back to the mind space framework in our other training courses as well. So what we would be looking at in terms of the 7 C's of behavior change, we're going to be looking at calming yourself, or helping the parent to calm themselves, communication, choices, change preparation, consequences, constructive feedback, and considering the next time. Calming yourself. And this can be even as a professional, calming yourself before you go in to support a family so that they can then feel calmed by your presence. We know that families who have to balance caregiving and parenting, that the bedtime routine can be incredibly stressful because they have potentially been awake for 16 to 18 hours by the time the bedtime routine comes around. And it's a long time to be awake, particularly if the night before you've only had 3 to 4 hours sleep. So what we want to be doing is by helping the parent to practice grounding techniques and things that they know calm them. And that is easier said than done, but that is helping the parent to be able to practice these calming activities during the day in the least stressful time of the day, be that just after the school run in the mornings or on their lunch break from work, wherever they feel the least stressed in the day. That's when we want to be practicing our deep breathing, our mindfulness techniques, grounding, counting, even sensory, intuitive activities. So that could be using aromatherapy or even slime or any form of fidget just to help the hands. Some people even swear by playing Tetris and doing deep breathing while playing that. But we're going to help use these techniques when they're calm so that in the evening we're able to use them when we're not so calm. And also to recognize that even if they don't believe that they are stressed, their body language and their heart rate can give them away. And a lot of the times when we're working with children who either are pre-verbal or non-verbal, they can pick up on body language and emotional cues, regardless of their use of language. So we want to be looking at ways that we can not be showing any of those kind of stressful physical body language signals and creating a soothing environment. Here we can use things like soothing music, changing the lighting, and aromatherapy, not only as a calming technique for the parent and the child, but also when we come on to talk about the learned associations, this can be a way of killing two birds with one stone. We also know that when we have children who potentially do struggle to communicate, having non-verbal cues to the bedtime routine beginning, so that's the big light being turned off and a lamp being turned on, the use of red light over white light, using aromatherapy, or even just changing the channel or the music in the house, these can create these really strong associations, as well as being a really good way of helping communication. And luckily we come on to communication. So we can use visual schedules. So that can help to represent each bedtime step. We can use sensory cues. So that could be gentle back rubs or the turning off the lights. We can explore assistive technologies. So that can be apps and devices, or just a PEX board to be able to communicate that way. And it's a really good idea to work with your families to create a visual bedtime, because it then also gives the child a sense of ownership if they are not old enough or not sort of cognitively able to remember every single step. Having a visual can help them then have that ownership of their own bedtime routine if they don't have the cognitive ability, just because of kind of development or disability. We can also use gestures and signs in order to kind of illustrate that we are beginning bedtime. It's not advisable to have things like a bedtime visual chart if you're working with a child who has a demand avoidant profile, because by illustrating the bedtime routine, you're just giving them a very interesting visual description of all of the demands that you're about to put on them, which is obviously going to increase their anxiety. So when we're working with children who do have demand avoidant profiles, we would not advise that you use visual schedules and other things in order to kind of communicate the bedtime routine. If we have adults who don't know exactly what the child needs or wants, and they're encountering things like bedtime resistance, we can use the motivation assessment scale, and it can just help to illustrate if we are kind of dealing with a child who's trying to escape attention or demand, if they need attention, if they need something tangible, or if they have a sensory need that hasn't been met. This is a really good way of just being able to assess what they might need if we're not able to work that out through observation or communication with the child. Choices are what we are going to use next in our changing behaviour. We can use simple binary choices, and that's just holding up the two items. But we always need to hold space for the child to respond in a negative way. And if we are asking a question or we're instructing parents to ask a question, the answer might be it's neither of the options you've presented. And that's where we're then going to be creative and work with the children to try and, you know, find an option that does suit them. You can create a small selection instead of offering binary choice if you have a child that really struggles with choosing between two items. We can, you know, create a small selection and have them choose from it. That can be different thicknesses of pajamas, different styles of pajamas, the option to sleep in, you know, clothes that may not be pajamas, but they may be comfortable to the child. There's lots of different options that we can do with regards to offering choice. We can show two soft toys and let the child take which one to bed, and then let the adult take the other one to bed. That's quite a cute way of kind of having connection with the child. But again, if we do work with children with demand avoidant profiles, offering choice is going to cause an increase of anxiety. So we're not going to do that. We're going to do things like using declarative language. And that's where we would say, it's really late and I'm noticing how tired I am. I've started yawning and my arms and legs feel really heavy, or whichever physical sensations you personally or the parent has. I'm wondering if going to bed now could help me feel more rested tomorrow. That is a really nice way of the adult bringing the child's attention to the fact that it is late, and it may well be their bedtime, but it's not saying to the child that it is bedtime. And these are ways that we can communicate with children who do have different profiles and still be able to communicate with them about bedtime, but not do it in a way that's going to increase their anxiety. And again, at the bottom there, we want to be using kind of a low demand approach when we are working with children who do have demand avoidant profiles. And like I said at the beginning, we need to leave space for a child to say no or to resist, because we're trying to work collaboratively with the children, the young people that we're supporting. And that's where we can follow this up with the adult saying, I hear you saying you're not ready to sleep. Let's think together about what could help you to feel more comfortable when it is time to rest, or when you want to rest. Now, you may then get a child saying, well, I never want to rest. And again, we're going to hold space for that, because those are what those are their feelings and they're valid in that time. We're going to use change preparation because I think it's really key when we are improving sleep that we are explaining why and how. And that's where we can use social stories and photo sequences to explain why and how things are happening. And we're going to look to transitioning into new routines slowly. So we do look later on in this presentation at a couple behavioural techniques, and one of them is moving bedtime by 5 minutes each day, and or introducing a new sleep space by letting the child or young person spend time in it during the day, so that there is no pressure on them to actually sleep in it. It's just there as a space and they can use it, whenever. We can, if we are professionals working with families, this is where we would be supporting them to write a social story and helping them to introduce that to the child. We can try and introduce a child to potentially nap in their own bed if they are currently co-sleeping. That's a nice way with a lot less pressure, as naps are obviously much shorter. And older children, you can spend time on their bed doing nice activities with them just to help make it less of a stressful environment. They may still need to co-sleep, but we have at least given them an additional sleeping space that they are going to start feeling some ownership and safety over, if you can introduce it during the day in a non-pressured way. Consequences. So, as with everything, we want to kind of focus here on reinforcing the positive with meaningful immediate rewards. And we really want to kind of avoid using punitive measures. A child not sleeping or doing things at bedtime frequently is a form of communication rather than a child deliberately being naughty. And we want to kind of avoid a child being punished for something they may not be able to help. So what we can do is use sensory-based rewards if the child does manage to spend a little bit of time in their own bed. We can have things like special bath bombs or foaming soaps, and that's a really nice way of adding in a reward to the potential bedtime routine. We can use positive reinforcers as well, such as teddies and calming music, and incorporate that into the bedtime process so that the child can have a reward, such as having additional teddies in their bed or a new teddy that's then allowed to sleep with them. We can tell the child positive things about their sleep. So if they are struggling to go to bed, it's giving them positives. Like, when you sleep well, you'll feel happy, you'll have energy to play. And you compare this with kind of rewards like having cuddles from brothers and sisters in their bed, or from mum and dad, or having an extra 10 minutes of bath time, or even, anything that really supports that child. And if we are having a lot of resistance at bedtime and a lot of behavioural issues, we would be looking at using the I apologize, the ABC charts that were just listed back there. So that's where we record what was happening before, during, and after any form of negative behaviours, so we can look for patterns with our children and young people. Constructive feedback can be used both as a parent and as a professional. So that can be constructive feedback on what the child did really well during the bedtime routine. For example, they brushed their teeth for 2 minutes, and that was really good, even though they were anxious. And with a parent, it's, praising the things that they got right, and then looking at how we can frame the things that didn't go quite so well in a positive way for next time. We want to be building everybody's confidence, be that parent to child or professional to parent. And this is where we would be, observing the family's bedtime routine. And if observing wasn't possible, we'd get them to write it down, and then we would go through it together to look at if there are any things we can add in that can make improvements, or things that we do need to be working towards taking out. And as I said, we try and think of adding in initially rather than taking away. We also need to consider the next time. This is a form of reflection. So we want to be looking at exactly what happened and if there are any patterns or adaptations that we need. We need to be really empathetic, particularly if we're a professional working with a parent, because not only are they trying to make changes, which is incredibly hard, we're also asking them to keep note of what they're doing. And that is really difficult when you're tired as well. So we do need to be realistic that for the most part, people are doing the best they can with the strategies and skills that they have. So we can help a parent figure out if bath time is causing problems, because you'll be able to see that when we are keeping track using our assessments that we're going to come on to next time. We can discuss this by reflecting immediately after bedtime. We can do this by discussing with the child in the morning. And this also then opens up the ability to plan for disruptions. There will always be one evening where somebody could be, rushed to A&E, or there's, a motorway closed, which means dad doesn't come home on time. We should be preparing our children throughout this process that if disruptions and changes happen, there is a backup plan so that they know if there is some form of change, it's been discussed and there is a backup. And that hopefully will remove a little bit of that anxiety. Then we need to come on to assessing sleep. And I think it's really important that we consider, if you are a professional, that the family and the child's views are equally, if not more important than your views as a professional. We do need to be looking at the child's views and the family's views, because sometimes we have children who are doing things and showing behaviors that we might not like, but they're doing it for a very valid reason. And without getting their views and their opinions, there's no real way of helping them, because we don't actually know what their thoughts and feelings are, and you're putting kind of your opinion above theirs. One way that we assess sleep, and I would advise parents, carers, professionals, we use sleep diaries. It's a really good way of seeing a child's sleep across a 14-day period. It gives quite a good overview of the amount of sleep gotten, not only in on every night, but across a week and then a fortnight. It also shows if there are any patterns or if there are any behaviours that are coming up and are being responded to in a way that we may need to change. So this is a sleep diary that we use within Cerebra. And if you come to our full training, you would obviously get copies of all of these. But sleep diaries, you can record it in any way that you kind of see, you see fit to meet the needs of yourself, your children, or your work children. But it is a good idea to be keeping a sleep diary. We also need to discuss, when we are talking about children who potentially have sensory needs, that they may not be able to communicate pain. And we have on our website, we have a pain guide that can give some really good information about children with additional needs and pain. But it has this wonderful scale, which is a really simple tool to use to be able to assess a child for if they might be in pain. And a lot of the time, conditions such as reflux is comorbid with some of the other disabilities we encounter. So it's always worth considering if the child might be in pain, even if they've never mentioned that they are in pain, because it may not register as pain to them. We also have the Be Well checklist. And again, this is on our website, and it's another tool that you can use in order to assess a child. As I said at the beginning, sometimes you might want to start with sleep, but there may be other areas that are more concerning to the child or to the family. or for you as a professional. And what this Be Well record does is it helps to quantify if you think that sleep is the biggest issue. This will help explain why, because you'll see things like emotional outbursts and low mood, and you know that sleep could actually improve that. So this is a really good tool. There's a wonderful introduction video that I've just shared up here that you can find on YouTube, and it links from our website as well. And the Be Well checklist is also available to download. So I would advise everybody to use these tools. They've all been made through the Cerebra network. They are kind of designed with, cutting edge academics who are, exceptional at what they do. They are just really good tools. Next, we come on to learned associations. So once we have discussed change and we have decided that we're going to use a sleep diary to help assess, we then need to think at these learned associations. So these are the connections that the brain forms that help it know that this is sleep time. And you can sometimes have learned associations that you're not even fully aware of. For example, this lovely quote here about Harry enjoying his wrestling, and of course, jumping on his bed and using it as a wrestling ring then did not lead to him viewing bed as a relaxing place to kind of lie down and sleep. It was a lovely fun place where mum, would wrestle him and potentially, meet a lot of his sensory needs by chucking him around and giving that really deep pressure. But because he couldn't differentiate between bedtime wrestling and bedtime sleeping, it was a better idea to move the wrestling ring to the living room. So he still gets that connection with mum. He still gets some of that sensory input that he needs, but he's not then thinking that the bedroom is a wrestling ring. What we need to remember when we are thinking about associations is that parenting a child with an intellectual disability or any form of disability, it can be really challenging. And when we are dealing with parents and carers who are very sleep deprived, the behaviour response at night is frequently the shortest, easiest thing so that everybody can get back to sleep as quickly as possible. And that's basic survival. So we need to support the parent and be really compassionate, not criticize them for the way that they respond when they're exhausted. But you can see in this flowchart here how the parent engagement can fuel more of the same behavior if they're getting a response that's rewarding in some way. And what we would be looking at here is trying to support, if it's a need for connection, that need for connection earlier in the day. If it's food and drink, it's trying to put that earlier in the day. So this is where we're using things like the sleep diaries in order to keep a record of exactly what happened in the night, hopefully if everyone can remember, and then we can try and add things into the daytime to decrease the needs appearing in the middle of the night, so that the child also is able to fall asleep having their needs met and isn't waking up, dysregulated because they're not having them met during the day. What we can do in order to help a child learn to be able to fall asleep is use these sleep associations, and we can create them so that they start to recognize when it is sleep time. So most people tend to use some form of environmental cue, be that going to bed, turning the lights out. And for some children, darkness and silence is beneficial at nighttime, but sometimes the opposite is true. And we can use night lights, but we would always advocate for using a red light as it's the most sort of soothing and sleep triggering. And sometimes in regards to silence, some children really benefit from things like white noise. As long as whatever association we're putting in at bedtime is used consistently throughout the night, there's no issue with using a white noise machine or similar. There are several free apps as well that will run all night that can just help a child, particularly if they are sensitive from like an auditory point of view. White noise, and there's so many different noises. There's red noise, there's brown noise. But having a form of noise like that can really help them tune out some of the environmental noise that may happen and may cause anxiety, such as parents going to bed or other siblings crying, or just noise from the street. These can be ways that we can help support children. We can use behavioral routines. So that's our pre-sleep rituals. Lots of people read bedtime stories. Some people meditate. Most people brush their teeth as part of the bedtime routine. But again, if you do have a child with sensory needs, it may be worth moving the teeth brushing to a little bit earlier, just because the cold and the mintiness and the bathroom lights can be quite stimulating at times. And also with regards to our behavioral routines, we want to be looking at sleep hygiene. So that's the really good sleep habits. So that's going to bed at the same time every night. For the most part, we know that sometimes weekends can stay up a little bit later, but for the most part within a sort of hour of the same time. And that also then leads to waking up at the same time, which again, Saturdays and Sundays, some people don't always like to. But in terms of sleep hygiene, it is best if we try and keep our falling asleep and waking up habits the same, as it's much easier for our brain to then have these really strong sleep associations. And sometimes we have some very classical conditioning that appears in sort of infancy, which is where we get used to being rocked or hearing lullabies or needing a dummy. And a lot of the times, breaking those sleep associations can be really, really tricky. And we have some children who, due to their disabilities, they need these associations much longer than you would expect a sort of typically developing child. So again, we would look at adding things in as we're trying to sort of remove the dependence on things that might not be great developmentally, like a dummy if you have adult teeth. And we can also sometimes have this negative conditioning where the bedroom and the whole bedtime routine has become associated with terror and anxiety, and that then wakes the child up and helps them to try and avoid to begin this routine, as it's something that's causing them, really significant anxiety. And again, what we want to do in that situation is try and add things in to make it nicer for them. And that would probably mean involving them in the change up of the routine, if they are able to be involved. There's always some way that we can communicate. So again, if that is something that you do need support with, you can drop us an email at Sleep Training and we can pop a couple of ideas if that is something that you encounter a lot. We sometimes have these cognitive associations. So with the positive thoughts, that's where you feel relaxed. Getting into bed is a nice feeling. It's safe and it's warm, and it's just heartwarming, and it's a lovely experience for you. And then we have some people who have the negative thoughts when it comes to bedtime. So if that's something that you're encountering with children, we can use sort of some basic CBT strategies to try and talk it through with them. And that's where we'd be looking at getting them some additional support, because they've gotten themselves, cognitively in quite a negative thought pattern. And we might need some help in order to break those associations. There are also cultural associations with some cultures who staying up until the early hours of the morning, but having a nap in the late afternoon. And that may be how this family that you're supporting likes to sleep. And again, we're going to try and support them with that as much as we can, because that's something that culturally is really normal to them. And the fact that it's not culturally very common within sort of the UK doesn't mean that it's wrong. So we're going to try and support them as far as we can. And we also have the environmental problems where you have the clocks changing, which will be coming up in about 2 and a bit months, I believe. So again, we sometimes need to help improve the sleep associations there, because when you suddenly have much longer nights, you can't then be using the idea that it's getting dark. So that's where we'd be using blackout curtains and dimming the lights artificially to try and help reinforce these associations, and trying to make the bedroom as comfortable as we can, in order to meet the child's needs and not overstimulate them, but also to not cause anxiety at the same time. And then the technological influences. We always have to mention the use of technology. We would always advocate that we try and remove technology for the kind of few hours before bed, but we do encounter children who use technology in order to regulate. And when we have children who use technology in order to regulate, that's where we'd be looking at adding things in before we start trying to remove the technology in the evening, because the child is going to become fearful and anxious if your only strategy is to remove the tablet or the PlayStation at 7 p.m. They're going to feel victimized, even though you can prove it's sleep hygiene and there's, academic backup that, the blue light is not brilliant for our sleep routines. They are still going to feel that they are being sort of picked on and it's unfair. So we're going to add things in before we start trying to take things out. And some people have learned dependencies on these specific sounds for falling asleep. And it's why it's always a good idea to switch them up if you can. So using different coloured noises, which sounds strange to say, coloured noises, but that's the name. Or, for example, a YouTube video that's 12 hours of the noise of the jet engines from the Starship Enterprise. That's another option. If a child has a particular specialist interest that you can use as a sleep association. The jet engines for this particular child, it was a very comforting noise and it was consistent throughout the night, and it led to significantly deeper, more restful sleep. So while you may be worried about creating a learned dependency, if the child is able to sleep with the noise, I would argue that it's better that they can sleep with the noise rather than not sleep at all. But again, it's about looking at what they want and need and what the family wants and needs before suggesting the things that we think. Our final section of the calm framework is looking at managing routine. This book is in the Cerebra library, and if you are a parent or carer, you can join our library for free and we can send books out to you. This is my particular favourite book. I just think it's really, really good. So if you did want to borrow it, we do have them. And I enjoy this book because it looks at the sleep habits checklist rather than a prescriptive routine. And I would be hoping that the majority of our children and young people are limiting their use of alcohol and tobacco. But this is also for the entire family. So when we are trying to support a child with their needs, frequently you'll find that the parent or carer or siblings are not getting a good night's sleep as well. So we try and look at the kind of a checklist across the entire household rather than just the individual child, so that everybody is making some small improvements to their sleep, and the child who's having the real sleep issues doesn't feel that everybody's suffering because of them. And that's a really important thing, that everybody buys into the idea that everyone can improve their sleep for the most part. So it's just, I just enjoy that it's a checklist rather than a prescriptive routine. So what this book states is essentially what we have covered, really, is that we need to recognize that disabilities do affect sleep, and sometimes the sleep pattern is not going to look the way it might for a child that didn't have any of these conditions or disabilities. The book is really, really good at looking at family involvement, and that's why I always like to mention that these strategies and ideas are for everybody, not just for the child that is the problem sleeper. And it looks at sleep through a behavioural lens and how we can try positive reinforcement and routine management to help. And for the most part, if you have a child who is, for example, under a sleep clinic and taking melatonin, they can always benefit from some sleep hygiene work and some improving sleep habits work, even alongside a consultant prescribing melatonin. These techniques are going to improve everybody's sleep. And it's always worth suggesting these behavioral and environmental supports alongside, a pharmacological intervention as well, because it helps get habits for kind of into adulthood where they may not be under the same consultant and they may not have access to what they've had access to as a child. Sorry, my screen just froze there. I wasn't able to change the page. Sorry. So what we're going to do with managing our routine is initially by keeping a sleep diary. This will show what the current sleep pattern is like, and it may be all over the place. Sometimes there's 2 to 3 hours one night and then 16 the next. But an honest sleep diary gives the best way of seeing a really good overview of exactly what's going on. We then want to be looking at a consistent, predictable bedtime routine. And this does depend on the child. So we sometimes have children with demand avoidant profiles where there can't be any form of routine like this, and it has to be child-led and very much different depending on the day of the week. And again, if we're working with children with extreme anxiety like that, we're going to allow that while we try and support them in the daytime to help them lessen their anxiety so that they can then tolerate some of the things that cause their anxiety at bedtime. We want to optimize the sleep environment, and this can be done to the entire house, supporting with things like blackout curtains, daylight lamps, trying to avoid screens and stimulating activities before bed, unless, of course, you have a sensory seeking child that needs some form of sensory input before bed, be that deep pressure or swinging or spinning. They may need that. So again, we're trying to be quite child-led and look at their needs and meeting their needs, because the hope is that once their needs are being met consistently, they will then sleep in a much better way and they will, be able to sleep and relax. We want to reinforce things positively. So when they do things that, we'd like them to do, we're really praising them. And then on the days when they're unable to do it, we're not shaming them for it, because not everybody is going to be able to do it every day. And we're going to try and introduce sleep associations. And that's by putting in items that aren't a human being in order to support. And if it is another human being, trying to remove that human being in a gentle way, which we are going to look at. So if we've done all of those things and we're still having some problems at bedtime, we are going to just touch on 2 behavioral techniques that we can use in order to try and improve sleep habits. So we're going to look at this graduated extinction and bedtime fading. So firstly, this involves, we're going to teach a child to sleep independently by reducing or removing the parent at bedtime. So this is where we're first going to try and understand the child's disability needs and communication style. It's probably not a good idea to start a process like this if the child is in a year group that has big exams coming up, because they're probably not going to be able to tolerate an intervention like this when they're already quite stressed. Or a child that's having physical or emotional or mental health issues, again, probably not the best time. But if we've assessed the child and we realise that actually they probably do have the ability to manage having the parent or caregiver reducing their presence, we would make sure that the environment is as positive as we can get it. And we're going to discuss the technique and the fact that mum, dad, caregiver, whoever it may be, is going to leave the child, but we're going to tell them that in a safe way during the day, so that they are reminded during the day that tonight this is what's going to happen. And we can use photos, visuals, social stories to help explain that. And this is where you would put the child into their bed and you would leave the room for 1 to 2 minutes before going back in. And you tell them that you'll be back in a certain number of minutes, and then you are back in those certain number of minutes. And the idea is that you will eventually be able to increase the number of minutes. If you have a child who finds it intolerable and distressing to be left alone, this is where the parent stays nearby, but maybe they move out of the child's bed. So that's a way we can adapt. And the parent can provide consistent reassurance as well that they will be back, that everything's fine. But again, if the child is incredibly distressed or it's not a brilliant time within their lives, that it's probably not the best idea to try. So we can use a different approach, which is bedtime fading. Now, this is where we temporarily delay bedtime to fit with the natural sleep patterns. If you've done a 2-week sleep diary and the child is naturally falling asleep at 10:15 most evenings, bedtime suddenly becomes 10:15, which sounds terrifying to most parents. But we do this because the child should, in theory, fall asleep incredibly quickly when they are put to bed at that time. And we would give them supports and things that they can do in the sort of 2 hours that they would usually be screaming or running up and down the stairs, that they can do that are calming, be that Lego or colouring or diamond art or cuddles with mum or an extended bath time, anything that's going to fill that time for them. So again, the ideas will come out in the email that you're all going to get after this. So please, if you feel like you are not keeping up, it will all come out. So you'll be able to read it in real time. And if you pop on our website, our sleep guide and our sleep tips booklet also explain all of this in a really beautiful and a really lovely visual way as well. Both techniques do have some pluses and minuses, depending on how you feel and how much kind of tolerable stress the family can cope with. It may be that neither is appropriate, but they might be appropriate 6 or 12 weeks into supporting the family. But again, you will be able to see that both techniques can be beneficial, but both can also cause negative reactions. So it's about being mindful of the things that we're suggesting. And if the family are struggling or the child is in a year group with exams and has started worrying, it's probably not the best time to be looking at a graduated extinction, but a faded bedtime might be a way of being able to support them temporarily. In our sleep tips booklet, we also look at some other ideas. So with our positive rewards, we can create a reward system where they can work towards something bigger and more exciting as a reward. It's just always really important that if a child has earned some form of reward, that it isn't removed regardless of what behaviours may come afterwards. And it's really tempting to remove it, but if they've legitimately earned it through trying some of these sleep techniques, removing that because they bit their brother or they threw paint at the teacher is going to then make them not want to buy into sleep support again. So we want to be not removing that from them. And if we have children with daytime naps, again, we have this in our sleep tips booklet, and you can go and take a look at how we can try and remove daytime naps if we have a child who is still napping. In our last 5 minutes, we are just going to touch on the courses that we offer that cover all of this information in much more depth. We have 2 courses, KEPSAC and KIPSAC. KEPSAC is the essential training course. It is CPD accredited and it currently costs £195. And it's an on-demand course. So this is where we look at basic sleep physiology and how it impacts well-being. We look at sleep hygiene in depth and how you can actually intervene with regards to just basic sleep hygiene. We look at typically developing children and how sleep can present in different age groups. without adding in kind of the lens of disability. And we also look at some of the genetic conditions that we come up. Again, we talk to families who have a child or themselves have the genetic condition and how that can impact sleep and ways that we can support them that way. So this course is currently undergoing accreditation with the OCN, and once it is accredited, it will be slightly longer and in more depth. But for the moment, this essentials course is CPD accredited and is on demand, and you will get a booking link and some more information in your round robin email after this webinar. And our other course is the KIPSAC, which is the OCN accredited level 4 course. And it's the intermediate course that we offer. It's a little bit pixelated, but you can see the level 4 up here is equivalent to the first year of a foundation degree or university degree or higher national certificate if you're in Scotland. And this course is a lot more in depth, the other one being 10 hours of virtual learning. This one is 3 days face-to-face or 4 online sessions that last for the most part of a day virtually. And it covers 3 main modules. So sleep health and management for disabled children, sleep intervention and family collaboration for disabled children, and practical applications for furthering family-based sleep support. We are running 3 courses this year. We have one coming up next month in Manchester. We have a virtual one running throughout June, and then we have another course coming up in November. There are a few spaces left on the Manchester course if anyone is wanting to sign up, but again, you'll get more information in your round robin. And our virtual course does give you access to the KEPSAC course for free as well. As a little bonus, as it's going to be a pilot virtual, so you may have to fill in a few more assessment documents just on your own opinion, not essays. And again, both of our courses have been developed with the research of the Cerebra network, so you know that you'll be getting kind of up-to-date research and practical applications, as well as how to write a full sleep intervention, which I think is normally the key thing that people want to know. So we are at 13:28, meaning we have 2 minutes left. If anyone did click join.nearpod.com on the way in, if you could pop back on using this code to just answer the 3 questions again. What will happen now is that once we have the recording finalized, it should come out in an email with all of the things that I mentioned, including if the chat has been managed to be turned on, any of the questions in there, as I can't see it. If there are any questions and the chat is on, we'll answer them and send them out in the email. But if it's not working or you wanted to email with a question, please email sleeptraining@cerebra.org.uk. Otherwise, you are all free to go, and you will be getting an email from me in the next couple of weeks when we have finalized everything. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending our first sleep training webinar. And we really do look forward to hearing from you. We do offer one-to-one support for sleep. So again, hopefully, if the chat has worked, the link is in there. And if it hasn't, it will come out in your email so that you can either refer yourself in for sleep support or refer your families in, or you can share it in support groups or schools, so that everybody who may need one-to-one support can get the one-to-one support that they need. I can see people are slowly drifting out, so please feel free to leave if you don't have any questions and you're not filling in the Nearpod questions for me. But again, all of the stuff I mentioned will come out in an email. And we just hope that we can get the right support to the right people. But please, there are no silly questions and no silly queries. So if you do want to email, somebody will get back to you as soon as possible. It's usually within a couple of working days. And we're always there. There's always somebody that will answer queries, even if it's something tiny or it's signposting to somewhere else. We're just happy to help. And if you do want to get in contact with regards to setting up bespoke training, we do that for employers. So again, that's something that we can discuss if you'd like to. I will be stopping sharing in a couple of minutes' time. So if you are still around, you may want to leave before I end up having to close the the screen, and it will just be me as a giant face, which can be a bit alarming if you're not aware it's about to happen. But again, thank you all so much for joining. It's been a real pleasure being able to share some of the stuff that the Cerebra Network has written and some of our guides to get that support for families. It's something we're really passionate about, and we're always trying to look for new ways as well. So again, if you do have any comments or queries, please do email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And